Peace, it was a melody the Sunward Dominion had learned by heart, a symphony of thriving gardens, of children's laughter echoing against ancient temple stones, of forges humming not with weapons of war, but with tools for building. For Lyra, a young woman whose spirit was as bright as her storm gray eyes, this piece was the very air she breathed. She knew the old legends, of course, the ghost king, Kale, who had saved the Pathfinder, Alara, from a frozen death. They were stories told by firelight, tales of a cruel past her parents had miraculously survived. She never imagined the past could reach out and claw its way into her present. The first sign was not a sound, but an absence. Lyra woke one morning to a profound and unsettling quiet. The dawn chorus of sparrows and finches outside her window was gone. Only the hollow sigh of the wind remained. She stood, her heart tapping a nervous rhythm against her ribs, and peered out. The world looked the same, the majestic sentinel peaks, the dew-kissed meadows, but it felt muted, as if the color had been dialed down just a notch. Then came the dreams, not just for her, but for many. They seeped into the Dominion's sleep like a slow poison. Visions of an endless, cracked desert under a perpetual twilight sky, a wind that did not blow but sifted. It carried whispers that were not voices, but stolen sensations, the fleeting joy of a forgotten birthday, the specific scent of a lost lover's skin, the comforting warmth of a hearth from a home long gone. These echoes of stolen memory swirled in that barren place, thin and desperate. Lyra's dreams were different. They were personal, terrifyingly intimate. She would find herself standing alone on that cracked plain, the sifting wind coiling around her legs like a cold serpent. And then the voice would come. It was not loud. It was dry, papery, as if spoken by pages turning in a tomb. You are the quiet one, the listening heart. We have heard the faint music of your world. We are the collectors. We are coming for the symphony. She would jolt awake, her throat sealed shut by a silent scream, the phantom taste of dust and oblivion coating her tongue. Her own memories of her mother's smile, her father's strong hands teaching her to track, felt fragile, as if they could be lifted from her mind like petals from a flower. She went to the elders. They patted her hand, their eyes kind but dismissive. Night terrors, child. The shadow of the old wars lingering in our bones. The spring winds play tricks on the mind. But Kale, the once ghost king, now a leader whose authority was etched in the calm lines of his face, saw her pallor, the tremor in her hands. He found her at the edge, a cliffside lookout where the Dominion's territory met the wild mountains. She was staring north, her body rigid. "It speaks to you," he stated. It wasn't a question. Lyra nodded, unable to trust her voice. She finally turned to him, her stormy eyes wide with a fear that was years beyond her age. "It's not like the stories you tell. The Hollow King wanted to consume. The spider wanted silence. This is different, Kale. It doesn't want to destroy what we have." She swallowed hard. "It wants to own it, to take our memories, our joys, our loves, and put them in its own cold, empty collection. It's a thief, and it's almost here." Before Kale could respond, before he could muster the decades of strategic instinct that had saved a kingdom, the sky betrayed them. It was high noon. The sun was a confident gold coin in a brilliant blue canvas. Then, a sound. A catastrophic, tearing shriek that seemed to originate in the mind before assaulting the ears. Every wolf in the Dominion clutched their head, a collective gasp of pain rippling through the valley. Above the great central spire of the sanctuary, the very fabric of the sky ripped. A jagged, vicious wound of light slashed across the blue. It was not dark. It glowed with a sick, pulsating violet radiance, like an infected vein against pale skin. And from this horrific scar, the whispering, sifting wind from the dreams poured into their world. It became visible, a shimmering, opalescent mist that descended with a dreadful, gentle inevitability. Where the violet light touched, the theft began immediately. Marlon, the head gardener, was tending his prized moonblooms. The violet glow washed over him. He blinked, looking down at the silvery flower in his hand with utter bafflement. He knew it was beautiful. He knew he cared for it, but its name was just gone. A perfect, empty hole where knowledge had been. Two little boys, Tarn and Jax, were in the middle of a frantic, giggling game of chase. The mist curled around their feet. They skidded to a halt, staring at each other. Why were they running? What were the rules? Their laughter died, replaced by expressions of blank, unsettling confusion. It was not violent. It was meticulously, surgically cruel. It erased the connective tissue of life, names, rules, shared jokes, the tiny, precious memories that build a culture. Pure, undiluted panic erupted. This was an enemy that bypassed walls, ignored claws, and rendered courage meaningless. How do you fight something that steals the reason you fight? Kale's voice, a roar of pure command forged in 1,000 forgotten battles, cut through the bedlam. To the sanctuary, now, get inside the stone. His voice acted like a lifeline. The stunned wolves scrambled, fleeing the open gardens and plazas for the thick, ancient stone walls of the central temple complex. Elara, the pathfinder, emerged from the leader's lodge. She did not look up at the bleeding sky. She looked through the world as she alone could. She saw the tapestry of fate that connected every soul in the Dominion, and what she saw made her blood freeze solid in her veins. The threads were still there, but they were fading. The brilliant gold of a new love was turning pale yellow, then white. The vibrant green of a deep friendship was leaching into gray. It was a silent, reverse blooming. The essence, the memory, the emotion, the meaning in every connection was being siphoned away, drawn up in invisible streams towards that monstrous violet scar. Kale! Alara's voice was a broken whisper. She reached for him, her face a mask of devastated understanding. They're not here to conquer. They're not here to kill. They're harvesting. Our memories, our bonds, their crops to them. Lyra, trembling beside them, let out a small, choked cry. She wasn't looking at the sky or the threads. She was pointing a shaking finger towards the flower vale, the most fertile and beautiful land bordering the sanctuary. There, the opalescent mist had gathered, coalescing. It was forming shapes. Dozens of tall, slender, man-like figures. They were woven from the mist itself, translucent and shifting. They had no distinct features, no eyes, no mouths, only smooth, hollow spaces that seemed to drink the light. They moved not by walking, but by gliding, an inch above the trampled blossoms. And their hands were held out, palms up, in a gesture that was not threatening, but infinitely more horrifying. It was a gesture of waiting, of expectant reception. The first of the spectral figures reached the great timber gates of the sanctuary's outer wall. It did not pound. It did not claw. It simply passed through. The solid wood offered no more resistance than air. A silent, collective despair filled the hearts of those watching from within. The walls that had kept them safe from wolves, from winter, from fear itself, were meaningless. The storm singers had crossed their threshold. The harvest of the Sunward Dominion had officially begun, and huddled between the legendary king and the all-seeing pathfinder was Lyra, the girl who heard their call, utterly unprepared to be the linchpin in a war for the soul of everything she loved. Inside the sanctuary's great hall, the air was thick with a fear no enemy's roar could ever produce. It was the quiet terror of watching your own mind become a stranger. Kale's commands were sharp, anchoring. Bar the inner sanctum doors, seal every window with cloth and pitch. Riven, take your fastest runners, check every storeroom, every tunnel. We must know our resources down to the last grain. Riven, his captain, nodded, his face grim. And the enemy, my king? How do we fight? Missed. Before Kale could give the impossible answer, a scream echoed from the hallway leading to the library. It was a sound of pure, intellectual agony. They rushed to find Orin, the ancient lore keeper, slumped against a stone wall, clutching his head. Scrolls were scattered around him. The treaties of the western marshes, he mumbled, his eyes wild and lost. I was just reading them. I held the knowledge in my mind. And then a cold draft and the words, they just emptied out, like water from a shattered cup. I know the treaties existed. I know they were vital, but their terms, the clauses of peace, gone. Ilara knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his temples. She didn't need to touch him to see it. The thread connecting Orin to his vast reservoir of knowledge, once a thick, sturdy cord of deep blue, was now frayed and bleached, its color draining away into the ether. She looked up at Kale, her expression dire. They're inside. They're not just outside the walls, they're in the walls. They move through stone like it's water. They're harvesting specific things knowledge, memory, history first. Lyra, standing in the doorway, felt a fresh wave of the dry, whispering call. It wasn't in her ears. It was behind her eyes in the base of her skull. The keeper of dead words, his collection was rich. But you are alive. You are a song waiting to be sung. We will have your melody, little one. She swayed, gripping the doorframe. They're talking to me, she gasped. They're pleased. Kale's silver eyes, usually so calm, flashed with a protective fury hotter than any forge. He stepped between Lyra and the empty hallway. They will not have you. But how do you protect someone from an idea? From a silent thief that walks through walls? The next hours were a slow motion nightmare. There were no clashes of steel, no snarls of beasts. The siege was conducted in terrifying quiet. A cook would forget a recipe that had been in her family for generations. A guardian on watch would suddenly be unable to recall the alarm signals. A mother would look at her child and feel a surge of love, but the memory of the child's first steps would evaporate like morning fog. The storm singers were curation artists. They didn't want to cause pain, they were indifferent to it. They wanted the artifacts of failing, the trophies of experience. Alara gathered the Dominion's council in the most secure room, the old armory, its walls lined with cold, unused steel. We cannot fight them physically, she said, her voice strained but clear. We must fight on their plane, the plane of memory, of spirit. How? Demanded Nara, a fierce huntress. Do we just think happy thoughts at them? We reinforce the threads, Alara insisted. We make our memories stronger than their pull. We must share, out loud. Now, everyone start telling stories. The older, the better. The more personal, the stronger. Tie your memories to each other. Weave a net of remembering so thick they cannot pull a single strand free. It was a desperate, beautiful strategy. Throughout the sanctuary, a new sound began, timid at first, then stronger. Not the sound of war, but of storytelling. Elders began speaking of their youth, of the great hunts, of the founding of the Dominion. Parents told children stories of their births, of funny mishaps, of moments of pride. Lovers whispered shared secrets to one another, reinforcing the private world they'd built. And for a time, it worked. The threads in Alara's vision, which had been fading, stabilized. The draining slowed. A collective warmth, a psychic resistance, began to push back against the cold, sifting presence. But Lyra was in torment. She was the conduit. Every story told, every memory shared in the sanctuary, rang in her soul like a magnificent, deafening bell. And with each peal, the whispers from the storm singers grew more intense, more covetous. So many songs, such a vibrant, noisy chorus. It is beautiful, we must have the conductor. That night, as the storytelling vigil continued, the attack changed. It focused. The opalescent mist seeped into the great hall itself, forming three tall, elegant figures in the center of the room. They ignored everyone else. They glided with a terrible, singular purpose towards Lyra, who was sitting with Kale and Alara, trying to anchor herself with their presence. Kale was on his feet in an instant, his body a wall of defiance. He swung a heavy iron mace, a relic from a forgotten armory. It passed through the lead storm singer's torso as if through smoke. The creature didn't even flinch. Its hollow face turned towards Kale, and it simply reached out. It didn't touch him. Its wispy hand passed into his chest. Kale staggered, not from pain, but from a sudden, profound dislocation. A memory, crystal clear and precious. The moment he first saw Lyra in the snow, the shock of her blue eyes meeting his, the absolute certainty that had flooded him, it flickered. It didn't vanish, but it became distant, faded, like a portrait left in the sun. He roared, a sound of pure rage and terror, not for himself, but for the theft of that sacred moment. Lyra screamed, no, but it was Lyra who acted. The violation of Kale's memory, the attack on the very cornerstone of her world, shattered her fear. A surge of emotion, fierce, protective, and blazingly loud, erupted from her. It wasn't a conscious power, it was a soul deep shout. That is not yours to take. Her voice did not just sound in the room, it reverberated in the space between spaces. The opalescent mist of the three storm singers shuddered. For a fraction of a second, they became less distinct, their forms rippling like a pond struck by a stone. They stopped. Their hollow gazes swiveled from Kale to Lyra. The whispering in her mind ceased, replaced by a new sensation, a chilling, focused interest. Ah, the papery voice sighed, a sound of horrific delight. The song is not just a melody, it is a weapon, a new instrument for the collection. The storm singer has found her voice. Then, as one, the three figures dissolved back into mist and seeped through the stone floor, gone. The immediate threat was over, but the victory was ashes. Kale was clutching his chest, his face pale, struggling to recall the vivid detail of his most cherished memory. And Lyra sat stunned, her hands trembling, realizing what she had done. She hadn't repelled them. She had fascinated them. She had shown them she wasn't just a repository of songs to be stolen. She was a singer who could create new ones. And they wanted the composer more than the composition. The siege was no longer about harvesting a field. It was about capturing the sun that made it grow. And Lyra now knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was their primary target. Her very defiance had painted a brilliant, unmissable target on her soul. In the deep quiet that followed the spectral assault, a new kind of dread settled over the sanctuary. It wasn't the sharp panic of the initial breach. It was a cold, heavy exhaustion, the kind that seeps into bones. Kale sat by the hearth in their private chamber, staring into the flames as if trying to burn the memory of the theft from his mind. He could still remember finding Alara. He knew he loved her. But the piercing, life-altering clarity of that first moment, the way the light had caught the ice in her hair, the exact shade of desperate blue in her eyes, it was now blurred like a reflection in troubled water. The loss was a phantom pain in a limb that was still there. Alara watched him, her heart breaking in a new way. She, who could see the connections between all things, could see the frayed, faded thread of that memory connecting them. It was still there, but it was weakened. She reached out, placing a hand over his where it rested on his knee. "We will get it back," she whispered, a vow she didn't know how to keep. Across the room, Lyra was curled in a chair, arms wrapped around herself. She felt like a bell that had been rung too hard, her whole being vibrating with a residual, terrifying echo. The look the storm singers had given her, it wasn't hatred. It was the rapt, covetous gaze of a collector who has just discovered a one-of-a-kind treasure. She had become more interesting to them than the entire history of the Sunward Dominion. I made it worse, she said, her voice hollow. I drew their attention. I shouted at them, and they liked it. Kale lifted his head, the firelight catching the silver in his beard and the fierce love in his eyes. You defended your family. There is no worse in that. You showed a strength they did not anticipate. But what is this strength? Lyra cried, unfurling to her feet, her frustration bubbling over. I'm not a pathfinder like Allura. I'm not a king like you. I'm just Lyra. I tend the glasshouse herbs. I like singing with the children. I don't have a legendary gift. I just have a loud heart. Elira rose and came to her, taking her face gently in her hands. Oh, my dear girl, you have the gift the legends forgot to name. You are a storm singer, not like them. A true one. Your heart isn't just loud, it resonates. It vibrates at a frequency that can touch the unseen world, the world of memory and spirit where they dwell. You didn't just shout. You projected your will, you pushed them, with feeling. The concept was too huge, too terrifying. So what do I do? Shout them all away. I felt like I was tearing my own soul apart to do that. No, Alara said, her mind racing, the Pathfinder piecing together a fragile theory. You don't use it as a weapon, not yet. You must understand it. You must learn its scale, its tone. Right now, you are an untuned instrument in a gale. You must learn to control the song. A hesitant knock came at the door. Riven entered, his face grim. My king, my lady, we have a situation in the Hall of Echoes. The Hall of Echoes was the deepest chamber of the sanctuary, a natural cavern where the Dominion stored its most sacred, non-physical things. It was where the Rememberers, wolves gifted with perfect recall, would speak the oldest histories, the founding laws, the great stories into the stone, believing the mountain itself would hold the memory safe. It was the spiritual heart of their identity. Now it was under direct assault. They arrived to a scene of eerie stillness. 5 storm singers stood in a circle in the center of the cavern. They were not moving, they were listening. Their hollow faces were tilted upwards. From the walls of the cavern, faint, ghostly echoes of the rememberers, voices could still be heard, whispering the story of the first pact, the tale of the Pathfinder's crown. But as the wolves watched, horrified, they saw the echoes dim. The whispers grew fainter. The storm singers were not erasing the stone. They were absorbing the echoes, drinking the sound memory directly from the air, from the very resonance in the rock. It was a silent, efficient harvesting of heritage. One of the rememberers, an old wolf named Thalia, let out a wounded cry and stepped forward. Stop, you cannot have this. It is ours. It is who we are. As if annoyed by a buzzing insect, the nearest storm singer flicked a wispy hand in her direction. A tendril of opalescent mist shot out and touched Thalia's forehead. The old wolf crumpled, not unconscious, but blank. She sat on the floor, her eyes wide and empty. She mumbled. I was speaking of the River of Stars? No, the Gathering. The foundational myth of her people, the story she had spoken 10,000 times, was gone from her mind, leaving only a shapeless, aching void. Riven moved to charge, but Kale's hand clamped on his shoulder, holding him back. You cannot fight mist, Captain, he said, his voice thick with fury and helplessness. But Lyra was not looking at the storm singers or at poor Thalia. She was listening, not with her ears, but with that new, awful sense deep inside her. She could hear the absorption. It was a sound like dry sand slipping through an hourglass, a relentless, gentle suction. And beneath it, she heard the stolen echoes, the voices of the rememberers, now trapped, swirling in the cold, hollow spaces of the collectors. A wave of nausea and fury washed over her. This wasn't just theft, it was desecration. Without thinking, without a plan, she opened her mouth. But she did not shout. She hummed. A single, low, clear note. It was the first note of the Dominion's anthem, a note of home and belonging. The note left her lips and did not fade. It hung in the air of the Hall of Echoes, vibrant and real. It interacted with the stolen echoes still hanging in the mist, causing a tiny, discordant vibration. All five storm singers turned their hollow faces towards her in unison. The dry sand sound stopped. The whispering in her mind returned, but it was different now, not covetous, but analytical. The note is pure, it is a foundation tone, it yearns for harmony. Sing the rest, little one, sing the song of this place. Let us collect it from the source, not the echo. They began to glide towards her, their intent clear. They wanted her to sing their history so they could take it, pristine and undiluted, directly from the fountainhead. Kale and Elira moved as one to shield her, but Lyra stepped out from behind them. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but a hotter, brighter anger was burning it away. They wanted a performance? She would give them one they wouldn't forget. She drew a deep breath, and this time she didn't hum a note of home. She sang a note of discord. It was not a melody. It was a crack, a tear, a sonic representation of her own rage and grief for Thalia's stolen mind. It was an ugly, beautiful, powerful sound that had no place in any collection of perfect memories. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The advancing storm singers recoiled as if struck by a physical force. Their smooth, misty forms rippled and warped. The opalescent light within them flickered wildly. The whispering in her mind shattered into a spike of static, a sensation of profound, offended disgust. Discord, noise, not a song, a scream, unacceptable. The instrument is flawed. The five figures dissolved into frantic mist, streaming away from her and out through the cavern walls, fleeing the abrasive, chaotic sound of her raw, unfiltered emotion. The Hall of Echoes was silent once more, save for Thalia's soft weeping. The immediate theft had stopped. Lyra stood panting, the aftershock of the discordant note still vibrating in her teeth. She looked at Kale and Alara, who were staring at her with a mixture of awe and alarm. She had discovered her power's second facet. She could not only resonate with emotion, she could weaponize its chaos. She could sing a song so antithetical to their cold, curated collection that they couldn't stand to be near it. But as her pulse slowed, the realization dawned, colder and heavier than before. She had repelled them, yes, but she had also confirmed their worst fear. She was not a docile source of beautiful memories. She was a wild, unpredictable force. And from the fading echo of their disgust in her mind, she understood their new goal. If they could not collect her song, they would silence the instrument. Permanently. Victory, Lyra learned, could taste like ashes. She had driven the storm singers from the Hall of Echoes, but the cost was etched in Thalia's empty gaze. The old rememberer could no longer recall the story she'd dedicated her life to preserving. She could remember her own name, her love for her family, but the great tapestry of the Dominion's past was now a blank wall in her mind. The theft was surgical, permanent. The story wasn't just stolen, the very shelf it sat on in her soul had been removed. The Dominion did not celebrate. They mourned. A deep, quiet grief spread, more damaging than any panic. What was the point of resisting if the price was your own history? If the very stories that told you who you were could be plucked from your mind like a ripe berry, Lyra felt the weight of it like a physical burden. She avoided the hopeful, desperate looks from her people. She was not their savior. She was a storm siren whose voice brought chaos, not peace. She retreated to the glass house, her sanctuary within the sanctuary. Here, among the humid air and the silent, growing things, the whispers were quieter. The herbs had no memories to steal, only the simple, persistent will to live. Kale found her there hours later, her fingers tracing the velvety leaf of a moonbloom sage. He moved with a predator's quiet, but his presence was a comfort, not a threat. You blame yourself, he said, not as a question. They came for the echoes, Lyra whispered, not looking up. But they only took them because I was there. My resonance, it's like a beacon. I draw them to what they want to steal. I'm not protecting anything. I'm leading the thieves to the treasure. Kale knelt beside her, his large frame making the delicate plants seem even more fragile. A lantern draws moths, Lyra. It does not create them. The thieves were already here. You did not lead them to the Hall of Echoes. They were already draining it. You stopped them from taking it all. At the cost of Thalia's mind, at the cost of a part of Thalia's mind, Kale corrected, his voice gentle but firm. She still lives, she still loves. You saved the rest of the hall. You saved the potential for new stories. You fight a war with no clean victories, only choices between terrible losses and catastrophic ones. His words were logic, but they couldn't soothe the sickness in her spirit. I can't control it, Kale. When I sang that noise, it felt like tearing my own heart out and throwing it at them. What if that's all I have, just more noise? What if I can't ever sing a true song again without it being a weapon or a beacon? Before he could answer, Alara appeared at the glasshouse door. Her face was pale, her pathfinder's gaze turned inward, seeing things they could not. The threads are changing, she announced, her voice taut. It's not just fading anymore, they're targeting specific connections. She led them to the communal dining hall. It was dinner time, but the atmosphere was funereal. People picked at their food, speaking in hushed tones, trying to hold onto their shared stories. Elira pointed subtly to a family, a broad-shouldered carpenter named Bren, his mate, Sella, and their two young boys. Watch, Elira murmured. Lyra tuned her new, unwanted sense towards them. She could feel the warm, golden threads connecting the family, threads of shared jokes, of comfort, of unspoken understanding. Then she felt it, a cold, pinpoint draft, like the breath of the void, aimed not at the family as a whole, but at a single, shimmering thread between Bren and his eldest son, Finn. The thread of a promised fishing trip, a moment of future joy they had been building in their imaginations for weeks. The cold draft touched it. The vibrant gold dimmed, not to gray, but to a dull, lifeless beige. The promise was still there, but the anticipation, the excited, secret joy of it was gone. At the table, Bren frowned slightly, looking at Finn. We'll go to the river soon, son, he said, but his voice was flat, routine. Finn nodded, his own excitement visibly dampened, replaced by a vague confusion. The specialness had been leached away, leaving only the hollow shell of the plan. They're not just harvesting memories, Alara breathed, horror struck. They're harvesting potential, hope, anticipation, the things that make the future worth living. They're taking the color from our tomorrows. This was a new level of violation. It was one thing to lose the past. It was another to have the future neutered before it could even bloom. As if on cue, Lyra felt the dry whisper in her mind, clearer than ever, tinged with a cruel intellectual satisfaction. Observe the bond of promised joy, a delicate, fleeting vintage. We sample it, we catalog its essence. The present moment bonds are stronger, more fibrous. But the future threads, they are sweet, so sweet, and you, little singer, are connected to so many futures. Lyra's blood ran cold. She looked around the hall. She was connected to everyone here by friendship, by duty, by simple shared existence. She was a node in the Dominion's web of hope, and the storm singers were now delicately plucking the most tender fruits from that web, using their connection to her as a guide. She was the lantern, yes, but she was also the map. "They're using me," she said aloud, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. "They're using my resonance, my ties to everyone, to find the most valuable things to steal. I'm not just leading them to the treasure room, I'm pointing out the individual jewels." Kale's jaw was a hard line. Ilara closed her eyes, seeking a solution in the unraveling tapestry. "We must isolate you," she said finally, the words painful. "We must dampen your connections, put you somewhere you cannot resonate with the community." "A prison," Lyra stated flatly. "A sanctuary," Ilara countered, opening her eyes, which were full of anguish. "To protect them, and to protect you. If they are using you as a focal point, removing you from the web might blind them, at least temporarily." It made strategic sense. It felt like a death sentence. To be cut off from the very bonds the enemy was destroying. To sit in silent solitude while her people's hopes were siphoned away one by one, it was its own form of theft. But as she looked at Bren and Finn, at the confused loss on their faces where excitement should have been, she knew there was no choice. Her very presence was a vulnerability. "Where?" she asked, her voice small. Kale stood. "The quiet room. The deep cell where I stored my own darkest memories when I first came to this mountain. Its walls are thick, lined with a stone that deadens sound, thought, perhaps resonance." The irony was bitter. The Ghost King's self-imposed prison would now hold the Storm Singer. As Kale and Alara prepared to lead her away, a young messenger, a girl barely older than Lyra, came sprinting into the hall, her chest heaving. "Pathfinder, King Kale, you must come to the western gate." "What is it?" Kale asked, his body already tense for a new threat. The girl's eyes were wide with something beyond fear, with bewildered awe. It's the land, the mountain itself, it's singing back." The western gate was not a gate in the traditional sense. It was a sheer cliff face, a natural bastion of granite that formed part of the sanctuary's outer wall. A small guard post was carved into the rock there, overlooking the steep, pine-choked descent into the valley below. When Kale, Ilara, and Lyra arrived, the guards weren't looking out. They were pressed against the cold stone of the cliff, their ears turned inward, their faces etched with confusion and a dawning wonder. At first, Lyra heard nothing but the wind. Then she felt it, a vibration. Not in the air, but in the soles of her feet, traveling up through the rock. A deep, slow, resonant thrum. It was not a sound of music. It was the sound of stone remembering it was alive. It was a tectonic heartbeat. And then, as she tuned her senses, she heard the song. It was vast and ancient, wordless, made of grinding continents and the patient flow of glaciers, of roots cracking stone and water carving canyons over millennia. It was the song of the Sentinel Peaks themselves. And woven into its immense, patient melody was a newer, familiar strand, a bright, defiant little tune of shared warmth and second chances. Their song, the Dominion's story. The mountain was singing the memory of the Hollow King's defeat back to them. How? Ilara breathed, her hand flat against the rock. As a pathfinder, she could see threads of fate, but this was different. This was the world itself speaking in a language of pure vibration. "It's holding our memory in its bones." Lyra understood instantly. "The stone, it absorbed the echo of our victory. When we defeated the Hollow King with a shared story, when we rewove the land, we didn't just change the people. We changed the mountain. We imprinted our song into its very being. And now that a new thing is trying to steal our stories," she looked up, her stormy eyes wide with revelation. "The mountain doesn't like thieves." As if in response, the deep thrum intensified. Up on the cliffs above the gate, a shower of pebbles and dust skittered down. But it wasn't a collapse. It was a shudder, a deliberate geographical shrug. Down in the valley, where the opalescent mist of the storm singers was thickest, gathering like a ghostly river to flow against their walls, the land reacted. The earth didn't open. Instead, the very air seemed to thicken over a particular patch of mist. The shimmering light of the collectors dimmed, compressed, and then, with a soundless implosion, was snuffed out. A dozen storm singers simply dissolved, their essence not harvested, but crushed by the focused, immense pressure of the mountain's disdain. The psychic backlash was a silent scream that Lyra felt as a hot spike behind her eyes. The dry whispers in her mind erupted into a chorus of shocked, outraged static. The silent one, the old stone, it interferes. It holds memories too deep, too heavy for the collection. Anomaly. Anomaly, for the first time since the violet scar had torn the sky, a fierce, wild hope ignited in Lyra's chest. They weren't alone. They had an ally as ancient and implacable as the enemy was ephemeral and cold. It can't reach inside, Kale said, his strategist's mind already working. It can only defend its own skin, the land directly part of it. The storm singers inside our walls are safe from it. But outside, they are vulnerable. Illyra's gaze sharpened. Then we must draw them out. We must make the harvest outside more tempting than the one inside. We need bait. All eyes turned to Lyra, the bait that had drawn them in the first place. The idea was terrifying. To deliberately step outside the sanctuary's walls to offer herself to the mist. If I go out there, Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper, the mountain might protect me, or it might not be fast enough. They could take me before the stone could react. You won't be alone, Kale said, his hand settling on the hilt of his old sword, a gesture more of comfort than threat. We will be your shield, not against their mist, but to give you time, to give the mountain a target. A plan, desperate and razor-thin, began to form. They would use Lyra's resonance as a lure. She would go to the high meadow, a place of strong, recent memories of pack gatherings and summer festivals, a place steeped in the sweet, future threads the storm singers craved. She would sing, not a weapon of discord, but a true, powerful song of those memories, broadcasting it like a beacon. The storm singers inside, drawn by the irresistible source, would be forced to flow outside to reach her. And the mountain, provoked by their presence on its sacred skin, would react. It was a gamble with the highest possible stakes. They would be opening the door, inviting the infection out, hoping the body's immune response would be lethal. Preparations were made in a frantic, silent hurry. Lyra was dressed in a simple, gray tunic, something that wouldn't distract. Illyra anointed her temples with oil scented with grounding herbs, pine, cedar, ironroot. This won't hide you from them, she murmured, but it might help you remember who you are, no matter what they try to take. Kale selected a small group of his steadiest warriors, including Riven. Their role was not to fight, but to form a physical circle around Lyra, a wall of flesh and will, to force the storm singers to contend with them to buy seconds. As the great timber gates were unbarred, a crack opening to the mist-shrouded world outside, Lyra stood between Kale and Alara. The mountain song was a steady, comforting drumbeat in the rock beneath her. Remember, Kale said, his silver eyes holding hers. You are not a victim, you are a storm. You are the daughter of the sentinel. Now go and sing the song that makes thieves tremble. Lyra took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling the gaze of her entire people upon her back, a weight and a warmth. Then she stepped through the gate. The world outside was a monochrome nightmare. The vibrant greens of the meadow were muted under the pulsating violet light from the scar in the sky. The opalescent mist curled around her ankles, cold and eager. She walked to the center of the meadow, her guards forming a tight, nervous ring around her. She closed her eyes, blocking out the terrifying sight, and turned inward. She found the memory of last year's sun dance, the bonfire's roar, the dizzying spin of the dance, the feeling of 100 hearts beating in joy as one. She gathered the feeling, the pure, undiluted memory of communal happiness. And then she opened her mouth and sang. Her voice was clear and strong, no longer the shout of discord, but a beautiful, piercing melody of remembered joy. It cut through the dead air like a lance of sunlight. The effect was instantaneous. From within the sanctuary walls, streams of opalescent mist began to flow, seeping under the gate, through cracks in the stone, pouring out to converge on the meadow. The hollow, faceless forms of the storm singers materialized from the mist, dozens of them, gliding with a hungry, focused speed towards the source of the delicious, potent song. The mountain's thrum became a growl. The ground trembled. Around the edges of the meadow, where the mist was thickest, the air visibly compacted. With a series of silent, seismic crunches, whole clusters of storm singers were snuffed from existence. But there were too many. The ones closest to Lyra, driven by a desperate need to collect the source before it was lost, ignored the mountain's wrath. They passed through the ring of guards as if they weren't there. Riven swung his sword in a furious arc, but it sliced through empty air. The lead storm singer reached a wispy hand towards Lyra's face, towards the song on her lips. Lyra saw it coming. She didn't stop singing. She poured more of herself into the note, the memory of joy now tinged with the fierce, defiant love she felt for her people, for Kale and Alara, for this mountain that fought for them. The storm singer's hand paused, mere inches from her. The hollow space where its face should be seemed to ripple. The dry whisper in her mind stuttered, confused. The song it changes. It is not just memory, it is a shield, a declaration. It says, "This is mine, this is us." For a crucial second, it hesitated, confounded by a song that was not just a passive memory to be taken, but an active, living force of identity. That second was all the mountain needed. The ground directly beneath the hovering storm singer didn't open. It hardened. The air crystallized into impossible pressure. With a final, psychic squeal of negation, the collector was compressed into a pinpoint of light and then gone. Not harvested. Erased by a force that refused to be curated. A wave of the same force radiated out, cleansing the meadow. The remaining storm singers fled, dissolving into mist that streamed back towards the sanctuary, seeking the safety of the internal, non-living stone. The song ended. Lyra stood panting in the sudden, clean silence. The violet light from the scar seemed dimmer, the mist thinner. They had won a battle. They had drawn the poison out and let the world's own immune system attack it. But as she turned back towards the gate, her legs weak with relief, she saw it. High above, the jagged violet scar in the sky pulsed once, angrily. And from its depths, a new, darker shape began to coalesce and descend. It was not a wispy, humanoid collector. It was a vast, swirling vortex of concentrated mist, a silent hurricane eye of stolen memories and harvested potential. And at its core, a deeper darkness formed, a single, more defined silhouette with 2 points of cold, violet light where eyes would be. The whispering voice returned to Lyra's mind, no longer dry and intellectual, but cold with a focused, terrible wrath. The instrument is flawed. The stone is an obstacle. The collection is compromised. We shall no longer harvest. We shall scour. The conductor had arrived. The silence after the meadow battle was not peaceful. It was the breath-held quiet of a world that has just seen a dragon land in its backyard. The vortex descended from the violet scar with a dreadful, stately slowness, a swirling maelstrom of stolen echoes and extinguished hopes. The opalescent mist that had plagued them now churned like a malevolent galaxy around a central, solidifying darkness. The figure that stepped from the vortex onto the scarred meadow grass was both less and more than the other storm singers. It was tall, its form sketched not in wispy mist, but in something like solidified twilight, giving it a terrible, tangible presence. It wore a long, flowing coat that seemed to be made of the same shifting, stolen memories, scenes of lost laughter and forgotten triumphs flickering across its surface like dying lightning. But its face was what froze the blood. It was not hollow. It was severe, elegant, and carved from a polished, dark stone that drank the light. And in that stone face, two pinpricks of cold, amethyst fire burned with an intelligence that was ancient, patient, and utterly devoid of warmth. The conductor did not glide, it walked. Each footfall made no sound, but the grass beneath it withered and turned gray, not from poison, but from a sudden, total absence of life force. Every wolf on the battlements, every guard in the meadow, felt a new kind of fear. This wasn't the indifferent harvesting of collectors. This was the focused, analytical fury of a master whose perfect symphony has been interrupted by a screeching, defiant note. Its voice did not whisper. It spoke, the sound appearing directly in every mind within a mile, resonant and chillingly polite. You have been uncooperative. Your songs are wild, unruly. They bleed into the stone, they fight the hand that would catalog them. This will not do. Its burning violet gaze swept over the warriors, dismissed them, passed over Kale and Alara, and settled unerringly on Lyra. The gaze was a physical pressure, a cold spotlight that seemed to peel back her layers, examining the source of the discord. The anomalous instrument, you resonate with chaos, you imprint your noise upon the silent world. You are a corruption in the collection. Lyra stood her ground, though her knees wanted to buckle. I am not a thing for your collection, she said, the words trembling but clear. I am Lyra of the Sunward Dominion, and this is our home. Home, the conductor repeated, the word tasting strange in its mental voice. A sentimental concept, a clustering of repetitive, noisy memories. It lacks elegance. We shall provide order. It raised a hand not towards Lyra, but towards the sanctuary itself. The hand was not wispy. It was slender, carved of that same dark stone, graceful and terrible. From its fingertips, a new kind of energy pulsed, not the sifting, draining pull of the collectors. This was a command. A wave of silent, violet force washed over the great stone walls of the sanctuary, and the stone sang back. But it was not the mountain's deep, defiant thrum. It was a high, agonized, crystalline shriek. The memories the mountain had absorbed, the joy of the dominion, the victory over the hollow king, were being violently extruded. They were pulled from the living rock like sap from a wounded tree, visible as streams of shimmering gold and silver light, and drawn into the swirling vortex around the conductor. The mountain itself was being harvested. Elara cried out, clutching her head as if struck. No. It's tearing the memories out by the roots. It's hurting the land. The conductor absorbed the stolen light, and the flickering scenes on its coat intensified. It tilted its head, as if listening to a new, pleasing movement in its symphony. Better, purified, removed from the coarse, noisy vessel. Now for the primary source. Its burning eyes locked back on Lyra. You will be still, you will be silent, you will allow the extraction of your core resonance. It will be studied, then neutralized. This was no longer about theft, it was about dissection and eradication. They didn't want her song. They wanted to understand the flaw so they could remove it from the universe. Kale moved. He didn't roar. He simply stepped directly into the line of sight between the conductor and Lyra, drawing his sword. It was an act of profound, absolute defiance. A physical weapon against a metaphysical god. It was the most hopeless and most heroic thing Lyra had ever seen. The conductor looked at him. A flicker of something like pitying recognition passed over its stone face. The old guardian, the broken king who mended himself with sentiment. Your memory is a fascinating paradox. A story of violence rewritten as redemption. We shall take it, it will make a poignant exhibit. It gestured a casual flick of its wrist. Kale stiffened. He didn't cry out. His eyes went wide, then distant. He swayed on his feet. The sword slipped from his grip, clattering on the gray, dead grass. He was still Kale. But the journey, the specific, searing pain of his failures, the hard-won grace of his redemption, the visceral memory of his love for Alara, it was being targeted, isolated, and pulled from him like a master surgeon removing a specific organ. Alara screamed, a raw sound of shared agony, and rushed to his side, catching him as he slumped. She held him, but she was holding a shell, a man whose defining story was being stolen stitch by stitch. Lyra watched, horror and a new, white-hot fury obliterating her fear. They weren't just taking memories, they were taking meaning. They were unwriting the stories that made her family who they were. The conductor took a step forward, its focus returning to her, its purpose clear. It would dismantle Kale, then Alara, and then it would turn its meticulous, cruel attention to her. But Lyra was done being harvested, done being studied. As the conductor's power reached for the heart of Kale's story, Lyra did the only thing she could think of. She didn't sing a memory, she didn't scream in discord. She opened her mouth and sang a question. It was a single, pure, resonating note imbued with all her confusion, her love, her desperate need to understand. It was the sonic form of the question. Why? Why must you take? Why can't you listen? The note struck the conductor's extracting power, and something impossible happened. The cold, violet force stuttered. The streamlined process of theft hit a snag. The question, as a resonant frequency, had no data to steal. It was not a memory, it was an opening. A void seeking fulfillment. For a being that existed only to catalog closed loops of experience, an open-ended question was anathema, a logical error. The conductor's stone brow furrowed infinitesimally. The burning amethyst eyes flickered. A query? An incompleteness? This is not data. This is noise of a different kind. It was a hesitation, a tiny crack in its absolute certainty. In that moment, the mountain, wounded and furious, found its voice again. A deep, groaning roar rose from the very roots of the sentinel peaks. The ground beneath the conductor didn't just shake, it curled. A slab of granite the size of a house erupted from the meadow, not to crush, but to reject, shoving the conductor back a step, breaking its concentration. The extraction from Kale ceased. The conductor regained its balance, its stone face smoothing back into impassive coldness. But it looked from the raging mountain to the defiant girl singing questions to the collapsed king. The calculation in its eyes had changed. The environment is hostile. The specimen is aberrant. The collection parameters require adjustment. We shall withdraw and recalibrate. It did not flee. It turned with dreadful dignity, and the vortex of stolen light swirled around it, drawing it upward. The conductor ascended back into the jagged violet scar, which pulsed once more and then began, slowly, to knit itself closed from the edges inward. The scar didn't vanish. It shrunk to a smoldering, fist-sized wound in the sky, a dormant, watchful eye. The immediate, crushing pressure was gone. The storm singers had vanished, recalled by their master, but the victory was hollow. Kale was alive, conscious, but his eyes were haunted by a loss he couldn't name. A fundamental part of his story was gone. The meadow was a dead, gray ruin, and high above, the conductor's eye watched, a promise of a more precise, more terrible reckoning to come. Lyra stood in the silence, her questions still hanging in the air, unanswered. She had fought them off not with strength, but with confusion. And she knew, with a sick certainty, that confusion would only work once. They brought Kale back into the sanctuary, but they brought a ghost. The physical man was unharmed. His heart beat, his lungs drew breath. He could walk, speak, recognize faces. But the light that had always burned in his silver eyes, the light forged in the crucible of his past mistakes and his hard-won redemption, was dimmed. It was like looking at a magnificent, detailed tapestry that had been washed out by a brutal sun. The shapes were there, but the color, the depth, the story was gone. He remembered Alara. He knew he loved her. But the memory of why, the specific, world-altering moment in the snow, the feel of her fragile weight in his arms, and the vow that had reshaped his soul, it was a blur. A fact without feeling. He remembered leading the Dominion. But the crushing guilt that had driven him to build a kingdom on mercy, the specific faces of wolves he felt he had failed, those memories were hollow shells. He was a king without the foundation of his own myth. Elira never left his side. She held his hand, her touch a constant, gentle anchor. She told him their story, speaking it aloud as they sat by the fire, pouring every detail she remembered into the void left by the theft. The snow was so deep, she would whisper. You were a giant in furs, and your eyes, they were the first thing that wasn't cold. She willed the memories from her own mind into his through sheer love. Sometimes a flicker would pass behind his eyes, a momentary recognition, like a key turning in a rusted lock. Then it would fade, leaving frustration and a deep, quiet sorrow in its wake. He would squeeze her hand. I believe you, he'd say, but believing a story and remembering it as your own truth are oceans apart. The Dominion was leaderless in spirit. Riven and the council handled the practical matters, securing the sanctuary, assessing the gray-dead land in the meadow, maintaining watch on the shrunken violet scar in the sky. But the heart had gone out of them. If the storm singers could do this to the indomitable ghost king, what hope did anyone else have? Lyra was drowning in guilt. She spent her days in the glass house, but the herbs offered no solace. Their simple, silent growth felt like a reproach. She had stopped the conductor with a question, but the cost had been the soul of the man who was like a father to her. Every time she saw Kale's blank, searching look, it was a knife to her own heart. She avoided Alara, unable to bear the pain in the Pathfinder's eyes. But Alara found her one evening, not in the glass house, but at the edge, the cliffside lookout. Lyra was staring at the dormant violet scar, as if daring it to open again. You blame yourself, Alara said, standing beside her. It was the same thing Kale had said, but now the words were heavy with a shared grief. I do, Lyra answered, no defiance left. My resonance drew them. My question made it angry. It targeted him to punish me or to remove my protector. Either way, it's because of me. No, Alara said, her voice fierce. She turned Lyra to face her. It targeted him because he is the cornerstone. His story is the foundation of our world. The conductor is a curator. It doesn't just grab random memories. It goes for the masterpiece first. It didn't take his memory to hurt you. It took it because it was the most valuable piece in the collection. You did not make him a target. His greatness did. The logic didn't ease the ache. How do we fix it? Lyra's voice broke. How do we get a story back once it's been stolen? Alara looked out at the darkening peaks, her pathfinder's gaze turned inward. We don't, not from them. A memory in their collection is frozen, catalogued, dead. We can't retrieve it. She paused, a new, desperate idea forming. But a story isn't just a memory. A story is a living thing. It exists between people. In the telling, in the listening. Lyra frowned. We've been telling him it doesn't stick. Because we've been giving him a report, Alara said, her eyes beginning to gleam with a fragile hope. We've been describing the tapestry, but he needs to feel the weave. He needs to relive the connections. How can he relive what he can't remember? He doesn't have to remember the events, Alara said, her words coming faster now. He has to reforge the connections those events created, the bond between him and the pack he saved, the bond between him and the mountain that accepted him, the bond, her voice softened. Between him and me, the memory of the snow is gone, but the love that grew from it, that is still here. It's in the choices he's made every day since. It's in the kingdom he built. The love isn't the memory. The memory was just the first spark. The love is the enduring fire. She gripped Lyra's shoulders. Your power, Lyra, it doesn't just resonate with memory. It resonates with connection, with bond. You sang a question and it confused them because it was an open thread, a seeking. What if you could sing the bond itself? Not the story of how Kale saved me, but the feeling of the bond that act created. Not the memory of his redemption, but the substance of his connection to his people. The idea was staggering. To sing not a story, but the invisible, golden thread that was the story. To broadcast the love, the loyalty, the trust itself. I don't know how, Lyra whispered. Neither do I, Alara admitted. But it is the only path I can see. We must help Kale not remember his past, but reclaim his present connections. And you, my dear, turbulent, powerful girl, you are our bridge. You are the singer of bonds. That night they began. Not in the grand hall, but in Kale and Alara's chamber. They sat in a circle, Kale, Alara, Lyra, and Riven, who had been at Kale's side since the earliest days in the mountain. Don't try to remember, my love, Alara said to Kale, holding both his hands. Just feel. Feel my hands, feel that you trust the wolf sitting across from you. She nodded to Riven. Riven, a wolf of few words, cleared his throat. I do not remember the day you became my king, he said to Kale, his voice gruff with emotion. But I know the shape of the loyalty in my chest. It is as solid as this mountain. You are my leader. That is not a memory. It is a truth. Lyra closed her eyes. She let go of trying to hear the storm singers, whispers, or the mountain's song. She tuned herself to the small, sacred space in the room. She felt the thick, unbreakable cord of love between Alara and Kale, a cord that had been faded but never severed. She felt the sturdy, dependable rope of loyalty from Riven to Kale. She focused on those connections, not their history, but their living, vibrating nowness. And she began to hum. A low, steady, fundamental tone, the note of bond, the sound of trust. She poured the feeling of Riven's steadfastness into the hum. She wove the enduring, patient love from Alara into it. She didn't sing about them, she sang them. The sound filled the room, warm and tangible, like sunlight made audible. Kale, who had been sitting with a polite, detached expression, flinched, his eyes closed. He didn't see memories. He felt a pressure against the void inside him, a warmth against the cold, stolen space. It didn't bring back the specific memory of earning Riven's loyalty, but it made the loyalty itself, present and real, press against the wound of its missing origin. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. He didn't speak, but his hand tightened around Alara's. It wasn't a restoration, it was a reinforcement. They were building a new structure of identity around the scar, not by repairing the old painting, but by illuminating the wall it once hung on. It was a beginning, a fragile, desperate, beautiful beginning. And as Lyra held the note, she felt a third connection stir, one she hadn't consciously woven. A deep, patient, granite-strength thread reaching out from the mountain itself, not with a memory, but with a primal sense of belonging. The mountain remembered the king who had chosen to guard it, and it added its own silent, monumental chord to her song. For the first time since the meadow, Lyra felt a flicker of something other than guilt or terror. She felt purpose. The humming in the quiet chamber was not a cure, it was a cast. It held the broken pieces of Kale's identity in place, allowing something new to knit together around the absence. The next day, they expanded the circle. They brought in Nara, the huntress whose life Kale had saved from a rogue bear years ago. She spoke not of the attack, but of the years of service that followed, of the fierce, protective devotion that had become part of her spirit. Lyra hummed, weaving Nara's unwavering fealty into the song. They brought in Borin, the miner. He spoke of the trust Kale had shown in him, entrusting the bones of the mountain to his care. Lyra wove the sturdy thread of that trust into the growing cord. Each person added a new strand, not of memory, but of present lived connection. Gratitude, respect, camaraderie, family. The song grew richer, more complex, a living tapestry of bonds that defined Kale's place in the world from the outside in. With each addition, Kale's eyes grew less haunted, more present. He still could not recall the specific past, but the weight and texture of his relationships began to anchor him. Ilara called it the Symphony of the Scarred. It was music built not on perfect, polished memories, but on the resilient, mended places where theft had tried to break them. But the symphony had a listener. High above, the dormant violet scar in the sky, now no larger than a watchful eye, began to pulse. Not with its earlier malevolent energy, but with a strange, rhythmic flicker, almost in time with the gathering chords of connection from below. It was studying the new pattern. Lyra felt it first during a session with the Weavers' Guild. She was weaving their communal pride and skill into the song when a faint, echoic feedback vibrated in her teeth. It was as if her hum was being reflected back by the scar, analyzed, and returned as a distorted mimicry. She broke off, gasping. It's listening. The scar, it's hearing what we're doing. Alara's face tightened. It's a collector. It's observing a new phenomenon, a new category of data. Is it dangerous? Riven asked, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. Everything about it is dangerous, Alara replied. But this is different. It's not attacking, it's cataloging our recovery. The thought was chilling. Their act of healing was just another exhibit for the conductor's cold curiosity. That night the dreams returned, but they were not Lyra alone. Across the Dominion, wolves dreamed of the cracked plain under the purple sky. But now, echoing faintly in that barren place, they could hear the new symphony, their own bonds, their own mended connections, playing back as faint, ghostly music from the walls of the plain itself. The storm singers were broadcasting their stolen collection, and now their collection included the echoes of the Dominion's defiant healing. The psychological toll was brutal. It felt like the enemy was inside their very solace, turning their strength into a display. A profound despair threatened to sink the Dominion again. What was the point of fighting to heal if the act of healing itself became a trophy for the thief? Lyra fell into a frustrated silence. Every note she sang felt tainted, knowing it was being recorded by that cold, distant eye. She stopped the sessions. For 2 days, a heavy gloom settled. Kale, who had been slowly stabilizing, began to retreat again, the fragile connections fraying without reinforcement. On the third day, Alara gathered everyone in the great hall. She looked exhausted, but her voice was steel. They have stolen our past. They are watching our present. They will not dictate our future. She turned to Lyra. You are afraid your song is being stolen. It is being stolen. Lyra burst out, her composure shattering. Every note, every bit of feeling, it's all going into their archive. It's not ours any more the moment I sing it. Is a story stolen when it is heard? Ilara asked, her gaze piercing. Is a bond less real because it is witnessed? Lyra stared, confused. Ilara pressed on. They are collectors, archivists. They want to freeze moments, to pin them like butterflies in a case. But a bond, a living connection, it is not a moment. It is a current. It is a river. They can bottle a drop of river water and study it. But does that stop the river from flowing? Does that give them the river? She walked to the center of the hall. They have the memory of Kale's redemption in a bottle, but they do not have the man it created. They are recording the sound of our bonds. But they do not feel them. They can catalog love, but they cannot experience it. That is their poverty. That is our weapon. A spark ignited in Lyra's chest. You mean we shouldn't hide our healing? We should flood them with it? Yes, Alara said, a fierce smile touching her lips. They want to collect the symphony? Then let us give them a symphony too vast, too alive, too loud for their shelves to hold. Let us not sing our bonds in a quiet room. Let us sing them from the highest peak, with every heart in the Dominion joined. Let us send a tidal wave of connection so powerful it overloads their senses, that it cracks the glass of their display cases. The idea was audacious. It was turning their vulnerability into a battering ram. A plan was born, not of stealth, but of glorious, defiant noise. They would perform the Symphony of the Scarred not as a therapy, but as a broadcast, a declaration. They would gather every wolf in the main courtyard, under the watchful violet eye, and they would sing their bonds, their present, unbreakable connections, directly at the scar. The risk was monstrous. They would be focusing all their spiritual energy, all their vulnerability, into a single beacon, making themselves the biggest possible target. If the conductor could withstand it, if it could somehow harvest that titanic wave of feeling, it would own the soul of the Dominion completely. It was all or nothing. Preparations were a frenzy of purpose. There was no fear now, only a collective, focused fury. They were done being harvested. They would be the harvesters, offering a feast that would choke the god of emptiness. On the chosen day, as the sun reached its zenith, the entire population of the Sunward Dominion gathered in the stone courtyard. They stood not as a fearful crowd, but as a choir. Kale stood at the front with Alara, his back straight, his face solemn. He might not remember the stories, but he felt the press of 10,000 threads of faith aimed at him, and he stood to receive them. Lyra stood on a raised stone platform, facing the crowd, her back to the ominous violet scar in the sky. She was the conduit. She was terrified. Her hands were ice, her mouth dry. She looked at Alara, who gave her a slow, confident nod. She looked at Kale, who met her gaze with a steadiness that was new, a steadiness they had built. She closed her eyes. She did not reach for her own voice first. She reached out with her spirit, touching the web of the Dominion. She felt it all, the deep, abiding love of mates, the fierce protectiveness of parents, the sturdy loyalty of friends, the shared purpose of a people. She felt the mountains' grumbling support beneath their feet. She felt the lingering, frayed, but still present threads leading from Kale to every soul he had touched. She gathered it, not as data, but as music, as a single, colossal chord waiting to be struck. She opened her eyes, filled with the storm of their collective heart. She drew a breath that felt like it pulled in the air of the entire valley. And then, Lyra, the storm singer, did not sing a note. She gave the chord a name. She opened her mouth, and what emerged was not a melody, but a pure, resonant spoken word, infused with the power of every bond in the courtyard. Home. The word did not echo, it exploded. It was a sonic sunburst of meaning, of belonging, of shared walls and shared hearts. It slammed upward, a visible shockwave of gold and silver light, not of magic, but of solidified feeling. It hit the violet scar. For a moment, nothing happened. The scar pulsed, absorbing the colossal datum. Home. Then it screamed. Not a sound, but a psychic shriek of overload, of system failure. The scar wasn't just collecting the concept, it was being forced to experience it. The collectors, the conductor, their entire existence was based on cold, external curation. They had no framework for the visceral, internal reality of home. It was too big, too warm, too fundamentally alive. The scar in the sky convulsed. The violet light flared, then stuttered, flashing chaotically. Cracks of pure, clean darkness, the black of the natural night sky, spidered across its surface. From within the scar, the dry, papery whispers of the storm singers erupted into a cacophonous wail of confusion and pain. Too much, too full, the data is alive. ITBURNS. It consumes the collection. The scar didn't just close, it shattered. With a final, silent implosion, the jagged wound in the sky collapsed in on itself. The last of the violet light was snuffed out. A rain of harmless, shimmering dust, the powdered remnants of stolen memories, fell like sad, fading glitter onto the courtyard below. And then there was only sky. Clean, endless afternoon blue. A stunned, ringing silence filled the dominion. They had done it. They had not fought the thief. They had offered it a treasure so real it broke the thief's hands. Lyra swayed, utterly spent, the immense cord still vibrating in her bones. She looked at the sky, then at her people. Kale was looking at his own hands, as if feeling the echoes of 1,000 connections singing through him. Then he looked at Alara, and for the first time since the meadow, his eyes held not just love, but a dawning, profound understanding. The conductor was gone. The storm singers were silenced. But as the glittering dust settled on their upturned faces, Lyra knew with a cold certainty that such a powerful entity did not simply cease to be. It had been driven back. It had been wounded. But it would not forget the taste of a song that could break the world. The silence after the sky healed was deafening. For a long moment, no one moved. They stood in the courtyard, faces turned upward, as if waiting for the violet scar to reappear, for the whispers to return. But there was only the vast, indifferent blue and the gentle, mocking chirp of a sparrow reclaiming its song from a high pine. Then a sound began. It was not a cheer. It was a deep, collective exhalation, a sigh that seemed to rise from the very stones of the sanctuary. It was the sound of a pressure they had forgotten they were carrying finally releasing. People slumped where they stood, not in weakness, but in profound, bone-deep relief. Some wept openly, clutching their loved ones. Others simply stared, their minds struggling to process the absence of the dread that had become their normal. Lyra stood on the platform, her body trembling with spent energy. The word home still echoed in her soul, a beautiful, exhausted ghost. She felt empty, scoured clean, but in a way that was peaceful. She had poured everything out, and the sky had swallowed it and healed. Elira and Kale were at her side in moments, their arms steadying her. You did it, Kale murmured, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. You broke their will. But Alara, the Pathfinder, was not looking at the sky. Her gaze was turned inward, her brow furrowed. She was tracing the threads. The vibrant, living bonds they had just reinforced were brilliantly strong, glowing with newfound resilience. But other threads, the ones that had been leached, the stolen memories, the harvested hopes, they were not restored. They were simply gone, severed. Where Thalia's connection to the ancient lore had been, there was a neat, grayed-off stump. Where the golden thread of a promised fishing trip between Bren and Finn had been, there was a faint, phantom ache in the tapestry, a ghost limb of a memory. The victory was real, but it was a victory of survival, not restoration. They had stopped the bleeding by cauterizing the wound. The stolen parts were lost forever. And then, Alara's senses brushed against something else. Something new. A thread so faint it was almost invisible, silver gray and cold. It did not belong to any wolf in the Dominion. It trailed up, not into the healed sky, but away, across the mountains, to the north and east, towards a place her mind's eye had never wandered, a region of frozen tundra and perpetual, whispering winds known as the echoing barrens. The thread was attached to nothing within the sanctuary, but it was pulsing with a familiar, terrible resonance. It was a thread of observation, a tether of pure, cold attention. The conductor was gone from their sky, but it was not destroyed. It was watching from afar, licking its wounds. And it had left a bookmark in the fabric of their world. Ilara did not share this with the celebrating crowd. Let them have this moment of untainted peace. She locked eyes with Kale over Lyra's bowed head, and a silent understanding passed between them. The war was not over. It had just changed theaters. In the days that followed, a fragile normalcy returned. The gray death receded from the meadow, though the grass there grew back sparse and pale, as if remembering the theft. The bird song returned in full force. The oppressive silence was gone. People began to laugh again, though the laughter sometimes had a sharp, relieved edge to it, as if they were surprised by the sound. But the scars ran deep. Thalia could no longer serve as a rememberer. She took up knitting, her fingers creating new patterns since she could no longer recite the old ones. Bren and Finn went fishing, but the trip was pleasant, not magical. The stolen anticipation could not be rekindled. The Dominion moved forward, but it walked with a subtle, collective limp. For Kale, the symphony of the scarred had worked, but in a way that was bittersweet. He was whole again, present, a leader. But he was a new man, built from the love of his people rather than the ashes of his past. He remembered Alara, loved her fiercely, but the origin story of that love was a tale he knew only from her telling, not from his own soul. He was a king reconstructed from the outside in. There was a quiet solemnity to him now, a gravity that hadn't been there before. Lyra struggled most of all. She was hailed as the savior, the storm singer who shattered the sky, but the title felt like a ill-fitting cloak. She hadn't saved everything. She had traded specific, precious memories for collective survival, and the power she wielded, it terrified her. It was not a gentle gift. It was a seismic force. She had felt the conductor's consciousness recoil in agony when she blasted it with home. She had caused pain on a cosmic scale. What did that make her? She avoided the glass house, the place of simple growth. It felt too innocent for what she now carried. She took to walking the high, remote ridges of the Sentinel Peaks, places where the wind drowned out thought. She was searching for something, not the enemy, but an understanding of her own terrible song. It was on one of these walks, a week after the sky healed, that she found the second thread. She was sitting on a wind-scoured bluff, watching the clouds race over the endless forests below, when a glint caught her eye. Not on the ground, in the air. A mere arm's length away, hanging in the empty space before her, was a slender, shimmering filament. It was the color of a forgotten secret, gray-silver and cold. It vibrated with a familiar, hollow frequency. It was identical to the observation Thread Alara had privately described. And it was attached to her. It trailed from the center of her own chest, from the place where her resonance lived, and streaked away to the northeast, vanishing into the distant haze over the echoing barrens. A cold more penetrating than any mountain wind seized her. She wasn't just being watched, she was tagged. The conductor had not just observed their victory, it had marked the source. It had driven a tiny metaphysical hook into her very being. She was a specimen of interest, a prized anomaly, and the hook was a two-way thread. It allowed observation, but what if it also allowed influence? Or retrieval? Panic, clean and sharp, shot through her. She grabbed at the air where the thread hung, but her fingers passed through it. It was not of this physical world. She couldn't cut it. She couldn't pull it out. It was a part of her now. She ran. She fled the ridge, stumbling over rocks, her breath sobbing in her throat. She burst into the leader's lodge, finding Alara and Kale in council with Riven. "It tagged me," she gasped, clutching her chest. "It left a thread. In me, it's watching me right now." Galara was on her feet instantly. She closed her eyes, her Pathfinder's sight sweeping over Lyra. When she opened them, her face was pale. "I see it." Her voice was a horrified whisper. "A tether, a quantum filament. It's anchored to your core resonance. It doesn't steal, it transmits." "Transmits what?" Kale's voice was dangerously calm. "Data," Alara said, meeting his gaze. "Her emotional state, the frequency of her power, her location. It's a tracking beacon and a listening device." The room went cold. Their greatest weapon, their storm singer, was bugged. The conductor knew her every tremor, every fluctuation of her strange power. It was learning her, studying her weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment. And as Lyra stood there, feeling the invisible, cold thread humming against her soul, she understood the conductor's final, cruel move. It hadn't just been driven back. It had left its most fascinating specimen in the wild with a leash firmly attached. And one day, when it had finished its analysis, it would simply reel her in. The discovery of the tether changed everything. They had won the battle, but the enemy had planted a flag in their most sacred ground, Lyra's soul. Every moment of peace now felt like a lie. Every laugh from Lyra felt monitored, every quiet thought potentially catalogued. It was a psychological siege more intimate than any before. Alara and Kale convened a secret council. Just them, Riven, and Borin, whose understanding of deep, unseen things was unique. They met in the Hall of Echoes, where the stone still remembered the theft, its silence now a grim ally. "We must cut it," Riven stated, his hand resting on his knife as if the metaphysical could be solved with steel. "We cannot cut what we cannot touch," Alara replied, her voice strained. She had been studying the tether for days with her inward sight. "It exists in a layer of reality adjacent to our own. It is woven into the fabric of her spirit, not her body. To sever it carelessly could unravel her." Lyra, sitting hunched in a stone chair, felt the truth of it. The tether wasn't a foreign object. It was a parasitic idea, a cold concept that had rooted itself in the garden of herself. Pulling it out by force would tear up the garden. "Then we must hide her," Kale said, his brow deeply furrowed. "Dampen her resonance. We have the quiet room." "The tether will remain," Alara countered. "It will simply transmit silence or containment. It will tell the conductor we know about it. That may provoke a response we are not ready for. It knows where she is. The tether is a compass pointing directly to her always." Borin, who had been scratching his beard thoughtfully, spoke up. "Can't cut it. Can't hide from it." He looked at Lyra, his eyes like chips of flint. "Then use it." A heavy silence fell. "Use it?" Lyra's voice was a squeak. "Aye," Borin said, leaning forward. "It's a listening post, right? It hears your song, your noise. So give it a song to hear. A false one. You're a singer. Can you sing a lie? Not to us, to it. Can you make a fake resonance, a dummy signal, and pour all your power into that while keeping your true self quiet?" The idea was audacious. Deceive a god of perception. Create a psychic decoy. Alara's eyes lit with a frantic hope. A glamour of the soul, not to change what she is, but to change what the tether perceives she is. if she can bifurcate her consciousness to project one frequency while living another. It would be like living two lives, Lyra whispered, already feeling exhausted at the thought. One for it to watch, one for me to live. It is a terrible burden, Kale said, his gaze heavy on her. A constant performance. A single slip, a moment of true, strong feeling, and the facade shatters. What's the alternative? Lyra asked, looking at each of them. To be its puppet, to have every real feeling I have be data for its collection. To wait for it to decide my song is complete and come to collect me? She straightened her shoulders, a stubborn fire kindling behind her eyes. I'd rather be an actor than an exhibit, tell me how. It took 3 days of intense, secretive work. Ilara guided her, teaching her to partition her mind, a skill she'd only ever used to observe multiple fate threads simultaneously. They worked in the quiet room, its deadening stone walls containing their experiments. Lyra learned to create a resonance shell, a projected version of herself that thrummed with a steady, placid, uninteresting frequency. A song of peaceful contentment, of mild curiosity, of a power safely dormant. A perfect, boring specimen. The real Lyra, the stormy, passionate, fearful, loving girl, had to learn to retreat behind that shell, to mute her true emotional volume to a whisper. It was like trying to hold a thunderstorm inside a soap bubble. The first time she successfully projected the false signal for an hour, she emerged from the quiet room drenched in sweat and shaking with emotional whiplash. It felt like suffocating her own soul, but it worked. Ilara confirmed that to her Pathfinder's sight, the tether now hummed with the bland, false frequency. The true, vibrant core of Lyra was hidden, muffled, like a brilliant light seen through thick, frosted glass. Life under the glamour was a strange, half-lived existence. Lyra moved through the Dominion, smiling, talking, tending her herbs, but it all felt at a distance. She couldn't fully laugh for fear of cracking the shell. She couldn't feel deep grief or soaring joy. She was a careful curator of her own emotions, and the strain was immense. Meanwhile, Kale and Alara began planning for the inevitable. The conductor was wounded, not dead. It would return. And now they had a potential advantage. They believed their key asset was pacified and under surveillance. They had to prepare for an attack that would come expecting a neutered storm singer. Kale oversaw new, subtle defenses. Not walls against mist, but traps for perception. He had rememberers, those whose memories were intact, begin crafting false histories, planting echoes in specific locations, echoes of discord, of fear, of a dominion in disarray without its song. They were creating a theatrical set for the conductor to observe, a performance of weakness. Ilara worked on a more daring plan. If the tether was a two-way thread, could they send something back along it? Not data, but a toxin. A psychic virus in the form of a memory so contradictory, so chaotic, it could corrupt the conductor's pristine collection. They needed a memory that was pure, beautiful, and utterly incompatible with cold curation. They needed Kale's stolen memory of finding Alara in the snow, but it was gone. Unless. The mountain, Alara said one evening as they pored over maps of the echoing barrens. The mountain absorbed the echo of our victory. It holds the memory of the Dominion's founding. Could it? Could it hold the specific memory of that moment? Not as Kale experienced it, but as the world witnessed it, as a truth imprinted on the location. It was a wild hope. The memory wasn't in Kale's mind, nor in the conductor's collection. But perhaps it was in the stone, in the wind, in the very spot where it happened. A ghost in the geography. Lyra, maintaining her placid shell with grinding effort, felt a flicker of true excitement. It was the first real hope they'd had. A way to fight back not with noise, but with a restored truth. They decided on a mission. A small stealth group would travel to the place where Kale had found Alara years ago, a remote, high pass known as the Weeping Stones. They would take Lyra, whose true, hidden resonance might be needed to wake the memory from the land, and they would go not as warriors, but as archaeologists of the soul. The night before they were to leave, Lyra stood on the battlements, practicing her false calm. She looked northeast, towards the barrens, feeling the cold, silver tether stretching endlessly into the dark. She was a puppet on a string held by a sleeping giant. But for the first time, she and her family knew where the other end of the string was tied. And they were no longer just trying to cut it. They were planning to climb it. The journey to the Weeping Stones was a pilgrimage into the Dominion's own forgotten heartbeat. They traveled light and fast. Kale, a compass of grim purpose. Alara, a guide seeing threads visible only to her. Lyra, a carefully contained storm. And Riven with two of his sharpest trackers as silent shadows. They moved under the glamour of Lyra's false resonance, a psychic veil they hoped would mask their true intent from the distant conductor's tether. The landscape grew raw and ancient. The vibrant forests of the sanctuary gave way to stunted pines, then to barren scree slopes and knife-edged ridges. The air grew thin and sharp, tasting of ice and old rock. This was the domain of the Ghost King before he had a kingdom, a place of punishment and solitude. Lyra felt the weight of it. Every step felt heavy, not with fatigue, but with the gravity of history. She walked behind Kale, watching his broad back. This man, now her steadfast guardian, had once been a wraith in this very wilderness, a legend of self-inflicted exile. And somewhere ahead, his story had truly begun. On the third day, under a sky the color of a bruise, they reached the pass. The weeping stones were not what Lyra expected. They weren't grand or ominous. They were a cluster of weathered granite pillars, shaped by millennia of wind and meltwater into forms that looked like hooded figures bowed in grief. Snow lay in permanent pockets in their lee. The wind here didn't howl, it sighed, a low, constant murmur of regret. Here, Kale said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual command. He stopped in a flat area between the stones. He looked around, his silver eyes scanning the rock and sky. There was no recognition in his gaze, only a profound, respectful emptiness. Ilara says this is the place. Ilara moved forward, her hands outstretched, not touching the stone, but feeling the air. She closed her eyes, the pathfinder delving into the layers of the world. The threads of this place are strange, she murmured. They are not just connections between living things, they are connections between moments. The stone holds the echo of events. The air remembers the temperature of a long ago storm. It is a palimpsest of time. She opened her eyes, looking at Lyra. The memory we seek, it's not a recording, it's an imprint, a scar on the fabric of here. To hear it, you must not listen for a story. You must resonate with the scar itself. You must sing the note that matches the shape of the event. Lyra's heart hammered against the careful cage of her false calm. This was it, the reason they had come. She had to use her true power, here and now, and risk broadcasting her real, unglamored resonance up the tether. She looked at Kale, at the lost king standing where he was found. She looked at Alara, whose entire life had pivoted on this frozen patch of earth. Their love was the cornerstone of her world, and its origin story was a ghost in the wind. I have to drop the shell, she whispered. Alara nodded, her face tight with tension. Be swift. The moment you sing true, the conductor will know. It will hear the change in the signal. We must get what we need and be gone before it can act. Lyra took a deep, shuddering breath of the thin, cold air. She closed her eyes and, with a mental wrench that felt like tearing her own skin, she dissolved the false resonance shell. For the first time in days, she was fully, terrifyingly herself. The storm of her fear, her hope, her love for these people, her awe of this place surged to the surface. The silver tether attached to her chest gave a violent, psychic twang, like a plucked harp string. A distant, cold awareness, dormant until now, suddenly focused down the line with the intensity of a searchlight. She was exposed. There was no time to waste. She pushed the fear aside and turned her senses outward, not to the people, but to the place, to the weeping stones. She listened not with her ears, but with her soul. At first, there was only the sighing wind, the ancient patience of stone. She sang a tentative note, a pure tone of seeking. It washed over the pillars and died. She tried again, pouring her will into it, a note of questioning. What happened here? The stones were silent. Desperation clawed at her. The conductor's attention was a growing pressure at the back of her skull, a cold lens focusing. They had seconds, maybe minutes. Ilara, sensing her struggle, spoke softly, her voice weaving into the wind. It is not a memory of sight or sound, Lyra. It is a memory of transformation, from loneliness to purpose, from death to life. Sing the moment of change. Transformation. Lyra latched onto the word. She let go of trying to find a specific event. Instead, she sought the emotional fingerprint of the place. She felt for the lingering essence of absolute desolation, the freezing cold, the howling emptiness that had once been here. She found it, a frozen, black cord woven into the very bedrock. The echo of Kale's exile. And then she sought its opposite, the spark that had broken it, not the details, but the quality of the change. She thought of Kale's hands, so gentle despite their scars. She thought of the unwavering safety she felt in his presence. She thought of a king choosing a cradle over a crown. She sang that. She sang the note of mercy chosen. The pure, clear tone left her lips and did not fade. It hung in the air of the pass, vibrating against the frozen chord of desolation. And the stones wept, not water. Light, a soft, silver luminescence seeped from the pores of the granite pillars. It coalesced in the air between them, not forming images, but playing a sensation. A wave of profound, aching cold, a shadow of immense loneliness. And then, cutting through it, a new sensation, a surge of decisive, protective warmth, a shock of recognition between two shattered souls, a vow, silent but absolute, etched not in words but in intent. No one will touch you again. It was the ghost of the memory. Not the sight of a Lyra in the snow or Kale's face. It was the emotional signature of the event itself, preserved in the mineral memory of the place like a fossil of feeling. Lyra captured it. She didn't hear it, she absorbed it. The essence of that transformative mercy flowed into her song, into her resonance, becoming part of her. She now held the ghost of Kale's stolen memory within her own spirit. As she did, the tether attached to her chest flared with a blinding, cold intensity. The conductor's focused attention was now a searing beam. It had not just detected her true resonance, it had sensed the acquisition of something precious, something it itself had stolen and catalogued. A paradox, a duplicate. The psychic scream that came down the tether was one of pure, outraged violation. Thief, you steal from the collection. The SBE Simon corrupts the data. The pressure became physical. The air around them crackled with violet static. The sighing wind turned into a shriek. The weeping stones trembled. It's coming. Riven yelled, drawing his sword, a futile but instinctive gesture against the storm of wrath descending from another plane of existence. Lyra, the shell, now, Ilara commanded. Lyra, clutching the beautiful, terrible ghost of the memory to her heart, slammed the false resonance shell back into place. The bland, placid signal shot back up the tether. The violent reaction stuttered. The conductor's rage met a sudden, baffling calm from its tagged specimen. The psychic scream cut off, replaced by a pulse of furious, suspicious confusion. The violet static in the air faded. The wind dropped back to a sigh. They stood panting in the sudden quiet, the silver light fading from the stones. They had done it. They had extracted a ghost from the past. Lyra held within her now the living echo of the Dominion's founding moment, a weapon of pure, restorative truth. But as they turned to flee the pass, the tether, now humming with a new, watchful malevolence, felt less like a leash and more like a tripwire connected to a vault of celestial fury. They had not just hidden, they had robbed the god of memories, and it knew it. The journey back to the sanctuary was a silent, haunted retreat. Every rustle in the scree, every groan of shifting ice, felt like the precursor to the conductor's vengeance. Lyra moved like a sleepwalker, her mind split between the careful maintenance of her false, placid shell and the luminous, turbulent ghost she now carried within her, the stolen echo of Kale's mercy. It felt like holding a captured star, beautiful, powerful, and dangerously volatile. Kale walked beside her, his usual protective vigilance heightened to a razor's edge. He didn't remember the memory they had recovered, but he felt its echo in Lyra's strained presence, in the way Alara kept glancing at him with a new, painful hope. The ghost was for him, a gift he could not yet unwrap, and the weight of that anticipation was its own burden. Alara was a storm of quiet calculation. As they navigated the treacherous high passes, her mind was already weaving the next, most dangerous phase of the plan. They had the toxin, a pristine, experiential memory incompatible with the conductor's cold curation. Now they had to deliver it, and the delivery system was the tether itself. We cannot send it while you are shielded, Alara explained in a hushed voice when they made camp in a shallow cave. The false resonance is a wall. It blocks all true transmission. To send the ghost, you must open a channel. You must drop the shell and, for a single, focused moment, project only the stolen memory back up the tether, like firing an arrow of feeling back at the archer. And the moment I do, Lyra said, her voice flat with exhaustion, it will have me. It will see my true resonance, my location, my intent, it will strike. Yes, Alara admitted, no sugarcoating the truth. It will be a declaration of war. It will come for you, immediately and with everything it has. The moment you send the ghost, you become the brightest, most offensive beacon in the world. So we need to be ready, Kale rumbled, staring into the small, shielded fire. We need a battlefield of our choosing. Not here in the wild, somewhere we can control the terms, somewhere the mountain can fight. The sanctuary, Riven said from the cave entrance where he kept watch. No, Kale and Alara said in unison. They shared a look. The sanctuary was their home, their heart. To draw the conductor's final, furious assault, there was to risk everything they had built. The hollow, Kale said, the word dropping into the silence like a stone. Ilara's breath caught. The chamber deep under the mountain where they had faced the Hollow King. The place where the entity of hunger had been pacified by Seleni's song. It was a place of immense, silent power, already scarred by metaphysical war. A place the mountain knew intimately. A perfect trap. It is contained, it is deep. And it remembers our song, Ilara agreed slowly, the plan crystallizing. We lure the conductor there. Lyra sends the ghost memory from within the hollow. The conductor, enraged, will focus its entire being on retrieving its corrupted specimen. And when it manifests there fully to claim her, the mountain and the lingering echo of the Hollow King's gratitude will have it in a vice. It was a gamble of unimaginable scale. They were proposing to bait a cosmic entity into a psychic ambush, using their own storm singer as the bait. Lyra listened, the ghost memory pulsing warmly against her carefully constructed calm. This was her purpose. Not to hide, not to sing pretty songs of comfort, to be the lightning rod, to draw the storm onto herself so the world could be cleansed. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "Just tell me when and where." For the next week, the Sunward Dominion prepared for an unseen war. Publicly, life continued its fragile normalcy. But beneath the surface, a silent mobilization took place. Borin and his best miners reopened the hidden, treacherous path to the deep hollow, reinforcing it subtly. Rememberers were positioned in specific locations throughout the upper tunnels, not to remember, but to project the false echoes of fear and discord they had crafted, feeding the conductor's belief in a weakened, fractured dominion. Kale and Riven drilled a small, select group of guardians not in swordplay, but in a strange, meditative exercise Alara designed. A mental technique to fortify their own psychic bonds, to become living anchors in the web of connection, making the tapestry of the Dominion harder to tear. And Lyra practiced. In the absolute silence of the quiet room, with Alara as her guide, she learned to hold the ghost memory at the forefront of her mind, a singular, radiant point of truth. She practiced the moment of transition, dropping the false shell and, in the heartbeat before the conductor could react, launching that memory arrow back up the tether. It had to be perfect. A split second of hesitation, a flicker of her own fear contaminating the signal, and it would fail. During these sessions, the tether would thrum with alarmed curiosity, sensing the surge of powerful, real emotion so close to the surface of its pacified specimen. Lyra would slam the shell back down, leaving the conductor with a tantalizing, frustrating glimpse. They were teasing the beast, making it restless, ensuring it would be primed to pounce. The strain was breaking her. Living a double life was one thing, but now she was juggling three: the false shell, her own hidden self, and the brilliant, alien presence of the ghost memory. She began to have waking dreams, flashes where she wasn't sure if the cold she felt was the mountain's chill or the memory of Alara's near death in the snow. She would look at Kale and for a moment see not the steady king, but the looming, fur-clad giant from the echo. She was becoming a crossroads where past and present bled together. The night before the planned confrontation, Alara found her in the glass house. Lyra wasn't tending herbs. She was simply standing among them, her hands clenched at her sides, trembling. "I'm losing myself," Lyra confessed, the words a raw whisper. "The ghost, it's so strong. It feels more real than my own memories. What if when I open the channel, it doesn't just send the memory? What if it sends me? What if I get lost in Kale's past and never come back?" Ilara took her hands, which were ice gold. "Listen to me. You are the river, Lyra. The ghost is a stone thrown into you. It changes your current, creates ripples, but it does not stop the flow. You are stronger than any single memory. You contain it. You are not lost. You are the vessel. And tomorrow you will pour out the poison and you will remain. I swear this to you." Her words were a lifeline. Lyra clung to them. At dawn, they assembled at the hidden mine entrance that led to the deep places. The group was small: Kale, Elira, Lyra, Riven, and Borin. They carried no weapons of war, only packs with water, simple food, and coils of strong rope. Their armor was the certainty of their plan and their faith in each other. As they prepared to descend into the earth, Kale placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. He looked into her stormy eyes, seeing the fear, the resolve, and the faint, shimmering echo of his own lost self within her. "You do not carry this for me," he said, his voice low and thick. "You carry it for all of us, for the story that must be told. No matter what happens in the dark, you have already given me back more than a memory. You have given me a daughter brave enough to fight gods. That is a story I will remember until my last breath. Tears, hot and real, spilled down Lyra's cheeks, cracking the shell for a beautiful, dangerous moment. She didn't try to hide them. She let him see her, truly see her, one last time before the descent. Then she took a steadying breath, reforged the false calm around her cracking heart, and nodded to Borin. The miner lifted his lantern. Right then, he said, his voice echoing into the dark throat of the mountain. Let's go and give the quiet things something proper to shout about. They turned their backs on the dawn and walked into the waiting dark. Above them, the silver tether hummed, a taut line to a distant, furious god. They were not going to cut it. They were going to follow it all the way down and use it to hang their enemy. The descent was a journey into the planet's memory. The air grew thick, heavy, and utterly silent. The cheerful clink of Boren's tools was swallowed by the consuming dark. Their lanterns cast frantic, jumping shadows on walls that were no longer rough-hewn stone, but the strange, smooth, light-drinking gray of the Hollow King's domain. They walked on a path that felt both solid and insubstantial, as if the mountain was dreaming of a floor beneath their feet. The psychic weight was immense. Lyra's false resonance shell felt paper-thin here. The hollow was a place of lack, and it pressed against her projected contentment, seeking the truth beneath. The silver tether attached to her chest glowed faintly in the gloom, a cold, guiding thread leading them deeper. It seemed to vibrate with a new, eager tension, as if the conductor sensed its prize descending into a place of power it did not understand. Alara walked with her eyes half closed, navigating by the threads of fate, which were faint and frayed here. The Hollow King's presence is dormant, she whispered, her voice a sacrilege in the quiet, but it is not gone. It is a healed wound in the mountain's spirit. We are walking through its scar. Kale felt it too. A profound, ancient melancholy that had nothing to do with stolen memories. This was the echo of an emptiness so vast it had once threatened to swallow the world. He had faced it before, with Alara and Selene. Now they were asking it for help. Finally, the tunnel opened into the vast, impossible cavern. The hollow, it was not dark. A soft, pearlescent glow emanated from the walls themselves. The faint, permanent echo of Selene's soul song, the gift that had pacified the hunger. It illuminated a space so large their lantern light couldn't find the far walls. The air was still and scentless. In the center of the cavern floor, a single, smooth depression remained, the place where the Hollow King's form had once sat. It looked like a throne for a god of nothing. This is the place, Alara said, her voice barely a breath. The epicenter, the connection to the mountain's heart is strongest here. The echo of Selene's song is the lock, and we, she looked at Lyra, are the key. They moved to the center. Lyra stood at the edge of the smooth depression, feeling the ghost memory inside her stir in response to the ambient power. It felt like two tuning forks beginning to vibrate in sympathy, the memory of saving a life and the place where a life had been saved from oblivion. Riven and Borin took positions at the cavern's mouth, their role not to fight, but to witness, to be anchors of the living world in this place of echoes. Kale and Alara stood on either side of Lyra. Remember, Alara said, her eyes locked on her daughter's face. You are the river, the ghost is the stone. Send the ripple and let the river flow on. Kale simply nodded, his silver eyes reflecting the cavern's soft glow. He was her shield, not against physical harm, but against the terror of what she had to do. Lyra closed her eyes. She took one final, deep breath, drawing in the dead, still air of the hollow. She centered herself, feeling the three layers of her being, the brittle false shell, the stormy, real core of Lyra, and the brilliant, burning ghost of transformative mercy lodged between them. This was it, no more practice, no more hiding. With a silent cry of effort, she shattered the false resonance shell. The change was catastrophic. In the psychic stillness of the hollow, the sudden eruption of her true self was like a supernova. The silver tether screamed with feedback, turning from a dull glow into a blazing line of cold fire attached to her chest. The signal shot up the line. Here I am. Real, powerful, defiant. But she didn't stop there. She couldn't. She had only moments before the response. She grabbed the ghost memory, the pure, perfect echo of Kale finding Alara, and with all her will, she didn't just hold it. She fired it. She took that captured star of feeling and launched it back up the blazing tether. A single, superluminal bullet of truth aimed at the heart of the conductor's curated collection. The ghost left her. She felt it go, a terrible, beautiful emptiness in its wake. For a second, she was just Lyra, standing terrified in the dark. Then the hollow answered. The tether didn't just transmit, it vibrated. The entire length of it, from Lyra's chest to whatever distant dimension housed the conductor, hummed with a dissonant, agonized shriek. The ghost memory had hit its target. The pristine, curated memory in the conductor's archive had been confronted with its own living, emotional source. It was the ultimate contamination, a truth that could not be catalogued, only experienced. The response was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The air above the smooth depression in the cavern's center ripped. Not a violet scar this time, but a jagged black tear in reality itself. From it poured not mist, but a concentrated blizzard of stolen memories, a screaming hurricane of frozen laughter, silenced lullabies, forgotten sunsets, all twisted into a single, raging torrent of loss. And at the heart of the blizzard, descending with vengeful, terrible grace, was the conductor. It was different. The elegant, stone-carved composure was gone. Its form flickered, sections of it dissolving into static, others solidifying with grotesque intensity. The scenes on its coat of memories blazed and died chaotically. The two amethyst eyes were wild, pulsating with furious, wounded light. It was not a curator. It was a collector enraged, its perfect system violated. Thief, Corruptor, you pollute the archive, you must be erased, the specimen and the anomaly, both will be purged. Its voice was no longer a polite intrusion. It was a hammer blow to the mind. Lyra cried out, clutching her head. Kale and Alara staggered, but held their ground. The conductor focused on Lyra, its wrath a physical force pushing against her. It raised a hand, and the blizzard of stolen memories coalesced into a spear of pure, psychic negation aimed at her core. It wasn't trying to harvest her. It was trying to delete her from existence. But the conductor had made a fatal error. It had come to the hollow. It had manifested its full, furious attention inside the mountain's oldest scar. The moment the spear of negation formed, the gentle, pearlescent glow in the cavern walls reacted. It wasn't the mountain. It was the echo of Seleni's song, the gift of compassion given to the Hollow King. The soft light hardened. It became a lattice, a net of solidified melody woven from the memory of a child's mercy. It wrapped around the conductor's spear, not blocking it, but harmonizing with it. The violent negation was met with a gentle, stubborn major chord. The spear dissolved into a shower of harmless, tinkling light. The conductor recoiled, shocked. What is this, a primitive ward? It is not data. It is sentiment. It tried to shift, to lash out at Kale or Alara, to break the anchors holding Lyra. But the mountain itself woke up. The floor of the cavern didn't shake. It breathed. A deep, resonant thrum, the same that had defended the meadow, rose from the depths. This wasn't an external defense. This was an internal immune response. The hollow was the mountain's healed wound, and the conductor was a new infection in the scar tissue. The walls of the cavern began to softly close, not with a crash, but with the slow, inevitable pressure of a healing scab. The smooth gray stone flowed, not to crush, but to insist, to seal the furious, foreign entity in a tomb of living rock. The conductor shrieked, a sound of pure, undiluted terror. It was a being of concepts, of curated emptiness. To be trapped, to be contained by the physical, sentimental world it despised, it was its ultimate nightmare. It fought, lashing out with waves of amnesiac force, trying to unravel the stone, to erase the memory of the mountain itself. But the stone of the hollow was not normal stone. It was stone that remembered being empty, and then remembered being filled with a song. It was resilient in a way the conductor could not comprehend. Lyra, freed from the direct assault, watched in awe and horror. This was their plan. The trap was sprung. The god of memory was being imprisoned by the world's oldest, most stubborn rememberer, the earth itself. But as the walls pressed inward, the conductor made one last, desperate move. Its burning violet eyes fixed not on Lyra, but on Kale, on the source of the ghost that had broken it. If I am to be curated, I take the original with me. It didn't attack. It performed one final, brutal act of curation. It didn't try to steal Kale's remaining memories. It tried to categorize his very existence. It shot a filament of pure, defining logic at him, a label, source of corrupting memory to be isolated. The filament struck Kale. He didn't fall. He went perfectly, terribly still. His eyes, fixed on the struggling conductor, glazed over. His expression smoothed into blank, placid emptiness. The vibrant, complex tapestry of the man, the king, the guardian, the mate, didn't fray. It was filed away. He was put on a mental shelf, his consciousness sealed in a cold, silent box within his own mind. Kael, Ilara's scream was the most human sound the hollow had ever heard. She rushed to him, but he didn't see her. He stood like a beautiful, perfectly preserved statue. The walls of the hollow met with a soft, final sigh, encasing the conductor in an impermeable sphere of singing stone. The blizzard of stolen memories winked out. The black tear in reality sealed. Silence returned, deeper than before. The conductor was trapped, neutralized, imprisoned forever in a crystal of its own antithesis. But on the smooth floor of the hollow, beneath the gentle, victorious glow of Seleni's song, stood the cost. Kale, alive, breathing, but empty. A king without a kingdom in his own eyes. A story filed away by the curator in its death throes. Lyra looked from the sealed tomb of their enemy to the living tomb of her father, and the victory turned to ashes in her mouth. They had won the war. But they had lost the king. Victory had never tasted so much like defeat. They emerged from the hollow into the weak light of the surface world, a procession of ghosts. Borin and Riven supported Kale between them, his steps steady but his eyes unseeing, a marionette whose strings had been cut. Ilara walked beside him, her hand clasping his, but his fingers were limp in hers. Her face was a mask of grief so profound it had frozen her features. Lyra stumbled behind them, hollowed out. The ghost memory was gone, fired at the enemy. Her false shell was irrelevant, shattered. All that was left was a terrible, ringing emptiness, and the sight of Kale's vacant face burned onto the back of her eyelids. The Sunward Dominion, which had braced for a final, cataclysmic battle, was met with a silence more devastating than any roar. They saw their leaders return, and a collective heartbreak rippled through the sanctuary. The conductor was gone. The sky was clear. But their king was a stranger in his own skin. They took Kale to their lodge. He sat where they placed him, by the fire. He would eat if food was put in his hand, drink if a cup was brought to his lips. He did not speak. He did not look at anyone. His consciousness was not gone, it was archived, sealed behind a pane of psychic glass, observing the world without participating in it. The conductor's final act had been to perfectly, coldly preserve him. Alara refused to leave his side. She talked to him constantly, telling stories, speaking of the future of Selene of the Dominion. She combed his hair, held his hands, willed him back with every fiber of her Pathfinder's being. But her words hit the glass and slid off. His silver eyes remained distant, reflecting the flames but holding no fire of their own. Lyra couldn't bear it. She had gone into the hollow to save him, to restore him. Instead, she had been the bait that led to his final, cruel imprisonment. She retreated to the highest, coldest ledge of the sanctuary, a place where the wind screamed loud enough to drown out her thoughts. But it couldn't drown the image of his empty gaze. Riven found her there 2 days later. He didn't try to offer comfort. He stood beside her, his own face lined with a warrior's sorrow. "It is not your fault," he said, his voice gravelly. "It was his choice to stand with you, to be your shield. He would make it again. What good is a shield that breaks?" Lyra whispered, the wind tearing the words from her lips. "A broken shield means it was used," Riven replied. "It means it stood between something precious and the blow. Do not dishonor his choice by calling it a waste." His words were tough, unyielding, and they were the first thing that felt solid in the swirling guilt. But they didn't solve the problem. How do you break glass you cannot touch? Elira, in her desperate vigil, began to notice something. A tiny, almost imperceptible flaw in the preservation. When she spoke of Selene, of their daughter's first laugh, Kale's finger would twitch just once. When she hummed the lullaby she used to sing to him in the early days, his breathing would slow, becoming less mechanical. The conductor's filing system was perfect, but it was based on its own cold logic. It had categorized Kale as source of corrupting memory. It had isolated the man from the data, but it couldn't fully comprehend the living, emotional echoes of that data, the love that had grown from the memory, the bonds that were its living children. The ghost memory was gone, but the family it had created was still here. Ilara called Lyra back from the ledge. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but a desperate, focused light burned in them. "The conductor took the source," she said, her voice raw. "It filed away the man who lived the story, but it could not take the aftermath, the resonance. The story created a pattern in the world, Lyra. It created us, it created the Dominion, it created you." She took Lyra's hands, her grip fierce. "You are not the memory, you are the consequence. You are the living proof that the event mattered. Your bond with him, the bond of a daughter to a father, that did not come from the memory. It came from the life he lived after. That bond is a thread the conductor could not see because it is not a thing to be collected. It is a process. A verb, not a noun." Lyra began to understand. "You want me to sing the consequence?" "Yes," Lyra breathed, "not the ghost of the past. Sing the living reality of the present that his past made possible. Sing me, his mate. Sing Riven, his captain. Sing Borin, his friend. Sing the sanctuary stones that know his step. Sing the mountain that accepted his guardianship. Sing the kingdom that is his living memory. Flood the glass box not with the story of how it was built, but with the undeniable, roaring fact of its existence." It was the symphony of the scarred, but on a monumental, targeted scale. They would not try to remind Kale of who he was. They would show him what he had made. They prepared one last time. They did not go to the hollow or a quiet room. They went to the very heart of the Dominion, the great courtyard where they had shattered the sky. They brought Kale and seated him on a simple stone chair in the center. They did not ask him to participate. They asked him only to be present. And then the Sunward Dominion gathered. Not just the council or the warriors, everyone, every wolf whose life had been touched by the peace Kale and Alara had forged. They formed a vast, silent circle around their frozen king. Alara stood before him. She did not speak of the snow. She spoke of the thousand shared mornings since. She spoke of the quiet joys, the hard decisions, the weight and the privilege of building a world. She poured her present, enduring love for the man before her into her words, and then she began to hum. It was the hum of a shared life. Riven stepped forward. He spoke not of oaths or battles, but of the trust that let him sleep soundly, knowing the watch was kept. He hummed the note of steadfast loyalty. One by one they came. Borin hummed the note of trusted stewardship. Nara hummed the note of protected freedom. A child hummed the simple note of safety. A weaver hummed the note of creative peace. Each person offered not a memory, but a current, a strand of the living tapestry Kale had helped weave. Lyra stood at the edge of the circle, feeling it build. This was not a directed chord. This was a hemisphere of sound, a dome of connection rising over the courtyard. It was the vibrant, noisy, messy, glorious consequence of one man's choice to be merciful on a frozen mountain pass. She felt the echo of Seleni's song from deep below, adding its gentle, powerful harmony. She felt the mountain's slow, approving bass note. She closed her eyes and stepped into the symphony. She did not try to lead it. She became its conductor, not by force, but by listening. She found the note that was her own bond to Kale, not of blood, but of chosen family, of admiration, of a daughter's love for the strength that made her feel safe to be weak. She added it to the choir. The sound was not beautiful in a traditional sense. It was immense. It was the sound of a civilization's heartbeat. It was the antithesis of curation. It was life, loud, interdependent, and gloriously imperfect. They directed this tsunami of living connection not at the sky, but at the single, still point in its center, Kale. The psychic glass box around his mind did not shatter. It dissolved. The conductor's perfect, logical isolation could not withstand the overwhelming, illogical, living proof of his own impact. The preservation was a lie because the thing it tried to isolate was not an isolated data point. He was a node in a roaring, luminous network. The network refused to be denied. In the stone chair, Kale's breath hitched, his blank, silver eyes, reflecting the faces of his people, slowly focused. The distant reflection sharpened into recognition. A tremor went through his hands. He blinked slowly, as if waking from a deep, cold sleep. His gaze found Alara's face humming before him. He saw the tears streaming down her cheeks, the fierce, loving light in her eyes. He saw Riven's unwavering stance, Boren's determined jaw. He heard the choir of his people, not singing his history, but singing their present, a present he had built. He didn't remember the snow. In that moment, he didn't need to. A single, slow tear traced the same path down his cheek that it had in the chamber weeks before. But this time, it was followed by a deep, shuddering breath that was wholly his own. His hand, lying limp on his knee, curled into a fist, then relaxed. He was not remembering who he was. He was recognizing what he was a part of. The glass was gone. The king was not restored to his old self. He was remade by the love of his people into something new. A king whose crown was not a memory, but a million living, singing threads holding him firmly, irrevocably, in the heart of the world he had made. And in the deep, sealed tomb under the mountain, in the absolute silence, the imprisoned conductor, forever surrounded by the echoing song of a mercy it could never understand, had nothing left to collect but the faint, fading vibration of its own eternal, perfect and utterly meaningless defeat. The silence that followed the symphony was different. It was not the hollow quiet of loss, nor the tense hush of fear. It was a deep, breath-held, listening silence. 10,000 eyes were fixed on the stone chair, on the king who had just returned from a place beyond memory. Kale did not stand and give a rousing speech. He did not weep with joy. He simply sat, his shoulders rising and falling with breaths that now seemed to draw in the very air of the Dominion, making it part of him again. His silver eyes, clear and present, moved slowly across the faces of his people. He saw them, truly saw them, not as subjects or as pieces of a history he'd forgotten, but as the living, breathing reason for his own existence. The consequence had become the cause. He turned his head, the movement still slightly stiff, and found Alara. A smile touched his lips, small but real, a crack in the ice of his long stillness. It wasn't the smile of a man remembering a secret. It was the smile of a man discovering a profound and beautiful truth for the first time. He reached out, his hand finding hers. Their fingers intertwined, a connection reforged not in the past, but in the potent, undeniable now. A collective sigh, warmer than the spring sun, swept through the courtyard. It was the sound of a people exhaling a grief they had been holding for weeks. Then a sound began, not a cheer, but a soft, rising hum. The same hum of connection they had just woven, but softer now, gentler. A hum of welcome, a hum of home. Lyra stood at the edge of the circle, watching, tears streaming freely down her face. This was not her victory, it was theirs. She had been the conduit, the lightning rod, the singer. But the power, the music that had shattered the final prison, had come from every soul present. She was not a solitary savior. She was a part of the chorus. The realization was a liberation more profound than any sky-clearing blast. In the days that followed, the Sunward Dominion did not return to the peace that had existed before the scar. That peace had been naive, built on the assumption that the old darknesses were vanquished forever. This new peace was wiser. It was a peace earned in the marrow, a peace that remembered the taste of theft and the sound of a silent king. Kale's recovery was not a return, but a renaissance. He moved through the sanctuary with a new quietness, a depth of listening that hadn't been there before. He remembered skills, recognized faces with a logic of context rather than memory. Riven, he would say, the southern wall needs reinforcement where the spring runoff has weakened it. He didn't remember ordering it built, but he could see the flaw in the present and knew how to fix it. His leadership became more intuitive, more deeply woven into the fabric of the present moment. He and Alara were inseparable. They spoke often, long into the night. He asked her to tell him the old stories, not so he could remember them, but so he could know the shape of the roots from which their tree had grown. He listened with the fascination of a scholar and the love of a mate, building a new relationship with his own history, not as an owner, but as an honored guest. And Lyra found her place. The Storm Singer title no longer felt like a burden or a weapon. It felt like a truth. She was the voice of the bonds between things. She began to work with Alara, not just in crisis, but in harmony. She could sense fraying connections between wolves before arguments broke out, and would hum a note of reconciliation in the gardens, often without anyone knowing why a sudden understanding would bloom. She could feel the land's health, singing strengthening notes to areas where the gray death had lingered. Her power was no longer a scream to shatter the sky, but a voice to tune the world. One evening, as the first stars pricked the twilight, Lyra found Kale at the edge, the cliffside lookout. He was gazing northeast, towards the distant, unseen echoing barrens. "It's still there, isn't it?" Lyra asked softly, coming to stand beside him. The conductor, trapped. Yes, Kale said, his voice a low rumble in the gathering dark. The mountain holds it. Seleni's song imprisons it. It is not dead. It is shelved. A final, perfect exhibit in its own collection, a monument to the failure of emptiness. Do you think it will ever get out? Kale was silent for a long time. The world is vast, Lyra, older and stranger than we can know. The conductor was a threat from one corner of its complexity. Our victory secured this corner. It does not make us safe from all corners. He looked at her, his silver eyes reflecting the starlight. But it makes us strong, and it makes us aware. We are not a sleepy kingdom anymore. We are guardians. Guardians of memory, of connection, of the messy, beautiful noise of life. That is our purpose now. He placed a heavy, warm hand on her shoulder. And you are our first sentinel, Lyra. Not a weapon waiting in a vault. A voice singing the watch. Your song is our early warning and our surest defense. It is the song of what we are. And as long as we keep singing it, to each other, to the mountain, to the very stones of our home, nothing that values silence and cold order can ever truly prevail here. Lyra looked out over the darkening valleys, the pinpricks of firelight beginning to glow in the sanctuary below. She felt the silver tether was gone, dissolved when the conductor was imprisoned. She felt the ghost memory was gone, a bullet fired. All that was left was her own true song and the immense, answering chorus of the world she loved. She wasn't afraid of the future anymore. She was curious about it. Her song was unfinished, and it was meant to be. It would change with the seasons, with new joys and new sorrows. It would grow as she grew, as the Dominion grew. She lined slightly into Kale's solid, steadying presence, and together they watched the night deepen. Far below, the chorus of the Dominion continued, the clang of a smith's hammer, the laughter of children, the murmur of storytellers, the crackle of hearth fires. It was not a perfect symphony. It was better. It was a living, breathing, gloriously unfinished song. And somewhere, deep in the earth, in a silent prison of singing stone, the last echo of that living song reached a being of perfect, curated silence, and was, for all eternity, the only thing in its collection it could never, ever understand.